I'm Mr. Kelvin Tan. In this series of videos, we are going to shift both the demand as well as the supply curve at the same time. And we want to find out what happens to the market price as well as the market quantity at the end. So let's think of the four possible permutation and combinations. So if let's say you have change in demand, change in supply, okay, increase, increase, decrease, decrease, increase, decrease, increase, decrease. Convince yourself that these are the only four possible permutations. We want to find out what happens to the market price. So let's look at scenario 1. We are going to increase both demand and supply. What happens to the P and Q? So as I draw this on the video, right, you may want to draw this at the same time on a piece of paper so that we can learn together. So you draw an upward sloping supply curve, downward sloping demand curve. Let me call this S0 and E0. Now, what I always encourage my students is this: resist the temptation to immediately draw the new demand curve and the new supply curve. Okay, before you shift any curve, right, take time to denote the original equilibrium price as well as the original equilibrium quantity. So in this case, this vertical horizontal dotted line, P0, this vertical dotted line, can we call this Q0? Okay, let this be a guide to what happens, to find out what happens to the final price and the final quantity. So in this case, you can either shift the demand first, okay, increase the demand first, or you can increase the supply first. It doesn't matter. So for the sake of this video, I'm just going to increase the demand first, okay, from D0 to D1. You realize that when the demand increases, right, ceteris paribus, because the supply curve is upward sloping, because of the law of supply, the quantity must be higher. Okay, the final quantity must be higher, the final price must be also higher. Okay, but what happens if I shift the supply to the right, if I were to increase the supply? Now, because the demand curve is downward sloping, right, the quantity will be higher, the price will be lower. So this already tells you that when you increase both demand and supply, we know that the change in quantity will only be higher. Okay, higher. But because of the offsetting effects on the price, the change in the price, right, is what we call indeterminate. It can either be higher or lower. Now, there will be questions where you need to argue that no, the final price is higher. There will be other questions where you might have to argue that the final price is lower. So how do you increase both demand and supply at the same time to achieve the result that you want? So what I'll tell my students is this: you take note of the original price, right? You extend the dotted horizontal line. Let me call this point X. Let point X guide you to how much to shift the supply to the right. You realize that if you want the final price to be higher, right, you must take care not to increase the supply beyond the point X in the new demand curve. But if you want the final price to be lower, you must increase the supply. You must shift S0 to the right in such a way that it goes past the point X. So I'm going to follow your notes. I'm just going to demonstrate the case where you want the final price to be higher. Okay, so in this case, right, you must make sure to shift the supply to the right. Don't shift so much. Okay, shift in such a way that the supply curve, like in this case, shift from S0 to S1. Then this should allow you to conclude that when both curve increases, when both the demand and supply increases, the final equilibrium quantity is at Q1, and the final equilibrium price, as expected, is P1. So in this case, when you increase both demand and supply, the final price is higher and the final quantity is higher. So I shall leave it to you to practice on your own as well as in the classroom. How do you increase both demand and supply in such a way that the final price is either the same or lower? Okay, you can demonstrate to you and you can discuss with your tutor in class. Thank you.